one of the things he talks about is in fairly stable times, like we've all we've ever known is like fairly stable times. We are living in a age where kind of we are less restrictive by our governments to move money or transact money or change currencies and stuff like that. But in times of crisis, the one of the first thing that happens is that the nation becomes very protective over its assets. So in a very unstable time in a particular country, the country wants to preserve and protect its currency. So you want to kind of avoid a run on the bank where, let's say I'm Swedish and we would have a big crisis in Sweden. We want to avoid me going to the bank and depositing my Swedish kroners and transacting them into dollar or transacting them into gold or any other currency, because that will cause a crash essentially, right? So the government will impose strict restrictions that are against the democratic freedoms that we are used to, let's say. And something very contradictory is happening right now in the United States, which is that the US dollar is the world's reserve currency.
Yeah.
And this is a huge advantage that the United States has, because it means that they can print dollars without the inflationary effects being as bad as they would have been if the entire world didn't transact in US dollar. So if the global US dollar supply is, I don't know, let's say 20 trillion, or I don't know what it could be, but much of that capital is owned from entities outside of the United States. So when you print money, the inflationary effects will not be as great, let's say. So you can basically create revenues by printing more dollars. So they can weaponize the fact that they have currently they enjoy the world's reserve currency. However, the contradictory thing that happens in the US now is that the incoming president, Donald Trump, is very crypto friendly.
Yeah.
Yes, and so he is backed by the tech bros of the US who are pushing for crypto harmonization and legalization and so on and so forth. And the thing is that if more people transact in Bitcoin or other cryptocurrencies that is outside of the US dollar, then crypto becomes a threat to the US dollar as the global reserve currency. Because the fact of the matter today, if we look at the biggest global reserve currencies, is number one is US dollar, number two is euro, and number three is gold.
Yeah.
Yes.
And the current trend is, to add further to that, if we look at both central banks around the world, there is now much more of a movement to gold. Yes. You know, those of you that check your stock portfolio often, who are hedged out in any sort of way in gold, would have seen that in their portfolio over the last 2 years. Yeah. The real movement, though, I think what you were sort of getting to is that, this almost heavy reliance that the US has on the printing press.
Yes.
With the 36 trillion that it carries in debt. As a ratio to GDP, they're not actually number one. That's my home country. Actually, no, that's Japan.
Japan, that's And
then
Japanese. I don't know.
Yeah, and then myself, and then I think it's the French. Weirdly, who knows? Retiring at 55 was too young. Let's not get political. But people have actually stopped buying those bonds. So when the bonds get created, and Ray Dalio, who you've brought up, he's obviously a big bond guy. All of his portfolios were around bonds. And, when China stops buying that bond and effectively stops taking delivery of US dollars, because that's what happens when you purchase, a bond in US dollars, or a T-bill, you might hear it referred to, that gets paid out in US dollars plus interest. When they stop buying that and moving towards gold, it makes it far harder, like you said, to print money. So, this current movement of everyone pointing the finger at Donald Trump and Doge, what's going on with Elon Musk at the moment to try and cut costs, this is intrinsic to the so-called American empire. And this is the falling out between Chimerica, which is a actually, if you're into reading books, Niall Ferguson coined this term, I think back in 2010. I think he's at Harvard or maybe MIT, I forget, as the historian over there. And, with this falling out of Chimerica, that's kind of what we've been seeing actually play out over the last 8 years. And so the US's fiscal responsibility now comes center stage, because they know in the back of their minds, if they go to borrow more money and create more bonds via the Federal Reserve, who's going to buy them? And that then forces down, obviously, the currency. We can link this further also to crypto, and there are certain forums and parts of the internet that, again, I was talking about sort of, there are various factions now in crypto. One of the factions suggests that Donald Trump is actually very pro Bitcoin and other currencies, because he knows that when those are bought, those cryptocurrencies, generally speaking around the world, they're always going to be in US dollars. This is a very sort of psyop-y way of looking at it. And he thinks that there could be potentially sort of a movement out of the US dollar, which is going to strengthen actually the strength of the US dollar. Because if people are still using those US dollars to purchase, buy things, etc., and there's an increased amount of transactions, even if they're moving out of that, it can actually still create width and breadth in the market. Say, for example, if they did want to, create more money supply, because effectively some of that money supply has then disappeared into crypto. So there are advocates, economists, etc., in that space that are suggesting that is one of the reasons that he has actually been pro-crypto. He's a 79-year-old man who doesn't go on the internet. So let's
take it with a grain of salt.
Let's take this, But I think he understands it, and he certainly understands, the axis of power in the world today. So America's money supply.
So I think the point is still before we head back into the innovation talk here, that the more people move towards Bitcoin as their preferred mode of transacting, the less control the nation has over its economy, essentially. So, the same argument can be made to some extent over the euro. That I'm Swedish and we voted no to take the euro as our national reserve currency. And I always remember from the debates around that time, this is like 2004, where there was an argument, how do we navigate this? Should we become part of the EMU or should we continue with our Swedish krona? And one of the politicians said, imagine that we are out at sea and we are in our boat. Do we want to be able to steer the boat where we want to go, or do we want
a big European Union story?
Do we want the European Union to steer the boat for us? And then the reply from another politician was, well, what if there's a big storm on the sea? Yeah. Do you want to be in the small boat that you can't steer, or do you want to be in the big boat that is nice and stable? But I think the point is they're both trying to make is like, well, if we're in our own boat, we can steer our economy to where it needs to be. So if we are in a difficult time with inflation, at least we can do something about it, with being in control of our own currency. Whereas if we are a part of the EMU, we are kind of beheaded to the EMU taking those decisions for us, right? And the more we move towards crypto, the less levers we have to pull in difficult times of the economy. But then if you take another step above that, you could also say that, well, maybe that forces us to just be more fiscal responsible.
Yeah.
Right? That like if we cannot pull these levers of printing money, for example, and increasing interest rates and so on to steer inflation, then maybe we are forced to just be more fiscally responsible on a day-to-day level. And maybe that's what the world needs in these times of incredibly high lending rates, and the US paying like 20% of their entire GDP goes to paying interest.
Huge. Yeah, I don't think most people realize what